In a quaint, peaceful suburb far removed from the grind of the city, lived a woman named Emma. Hers was not an ordinary life. A seasoned crime scene photographer, Emma was no stranger to the macabre underbelly of humanity. Her eyes, once lively and curious, were now etched with the weary lines of 1,000 horrifying images that lingered long after her camera had clicked. Seeking respite, she had moved to an old house on the outskirts of town, a slightly dilapidated structure that matched her worn spirit, but promised the solitude she so desperately craved. One day, as Emma was exploring her new home, she stumbled upon a mystery. In the cold, dimly lit basement, obscured by a wall of old shelves laden with forgotten knickknacks, she discovered a hidden door. It creaked ominously as she opened it, revealing a room untouched by time. A room that seemed to harbor secrets. The room was small, with peeling wallpaper and a single dusty light bulb dangling from the ceiling. But what caught Emma's attention was an antiquated reel-to-reel tape recorder nestled in the corner, its black silhouette stark against the gray of the room. Beside it was a stack of tapes, each one labeled only with a date. An icy shiver ran down Emma's spine as she looked at the tapes. This was a house with a past, she realized, and she was about to delve into its chilling narrative. Drawn by an unsettling curiosity, Emma decided to listen to the tapes. She threaded the first one through the machine with a mechanical whir, feeling a strange combination of trepidation and excitement. As the room filled with the crackle of static, she took a deep breath. Little did she know she was on the brink of unearthing tales of sheer terror.
I can't believe it.
The first tape began with a man's voice. It was shaky, fearful, but profoundly detailed in his description. He narrated his feeling of being watched, hunted even, by an unidentifiable man in a dark coat. The words flowed like a chilling river, detailing the relentless pursuit, the fear that never seemed to abate. It was as though the man was running from an ever-present shadow, a figure that lurked in his periphery, never quite revealing itself, yet never truly disappearing. Eerily, each subsequent tape echoed the same terrifying tale. Different voices, different dates, but the same harrowing experience. Each victim describing the fear, the dread, the inexhaustible pursuit of the man in the dark coat. The accounts were so vivid, so alive with terror, it felt as though the speakers were in the room, whispering their darkest fears into Emma's ear.
It doesn't blink. It never blinks.
After hours of listening to the haunting narratives, Emma sat in the semi-darkness of her basement, her mind abuzz with a potent mix of horror and disbelief. The tapes filled her with an instinctive dread, an uncanny sense of danger that crept under her skin and lingered in her mind long after the voices had ceased. The victim's fears became hers, and the man in the dark coat haunted her thoughts. Suddenly, her new home didn't feel so peaceful anymore. In the eerie silence following the end of the final tape, Emma felt the weight of the discovered horrors pressing on her. The creaks and groans of the old house seemed more menacing now, amplifying her fear. Determined, she decided to take action. First, she digitized the recordings, preserving the voices that had echoed through her basement. Then, with an aim to shed light on these chilling accounts, she forwarded them to the local law enforcement. She hoped that they might find some thread of truth, some evidence that might solve the mysteries concealed in the tapes. The police, however, seemed less inclined to share her distress. Skeptical of the tapes, they found no evidence of foul play, no missing persons matching the dates or descriptions. To them, it was a macabre prank, or perhaps a disturbing art project, nothing more. They thanked Emma for her vigilance, promised to look into it, but their tone suggested dismissal rather than dedication. Emma's hopes of resolution were quickly dashed, leaving her once more alone with the voices from the basement. The police's skepticism, however, did little to alleviate her growing unease. Each creak of the house, each rustle of leaves outside her window, seemed to echo the fear voiced on the tapes. Now it wasn't just the hidden room in her basement that held secrets. It was the very shadows of her home, stretching longer and deeper as the reality of the recordings began to sink in. Emma was left with a creeping sensation that the terror, though dismissed by the authorities, was very much real. As days turned into nights, Emma found herself engulfed by an overwhelming sense of dread. The dismissal by the police had done nothing to lessen her fear. In fact, it had exacerbated it. The house seemed to grow darker, its corners deeper, and its silence more profound. The feeling of being watched was no longer a tale confined to the tapes. It was creeping into her reality. One chilling evening, as Emma was drawing the curtains, she saw him. A shadowy figure stood at the periphery of her property, barely visible in the dim light from the street lamps. A man, enigmatic, inscrutable, and dressed in a dark coat. The very description from the tapes stood embodied before her. The sight froze her blood and sent a sharp shiver of fear through her spine. The words from the tapes echoed in her mind, giving form to the spectral figure outside. Night after night, the figure returned, each time slightly closer, slightly more tangible. The apparition was always the same, always silent, always watching. Paranoia and terror gripped Emma, the darkness outside mirroring the dread within her. The stories on the tapes were no longer just stories. They were a horrifying prophecy, one that seemed to be playing out right in front of her. Despite her growing fear, Emma couldn't ignore the strange occurrences any longer. The man in the dark coat was no longer a distant character in someone else's story. He was here, in her story, and she was determined to face this chilling reality head-on. Little did she know her encounter with the man was drawing perilously close. One evening, after returning home from a grueling crime scene, Emma found something that froze her in her tracks. A tape, as familiar as the ones she had found in her basement, sat ominously on her front porch. The setting sun cast long shadows, making the seemingly innocent object appear all the more sinister. With a growing knot of dread in her stomach, Emma picked up the tape. She knew what she would find, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of it. Her hands trembling, she threaded the tape through the antiquated reel-to-reel recorder in the basement. The voice that filled the room was not a stranger's. It was hers. Her own voice, shaky yet defiant, narrated her daily routines, her fears, her feeling of being watched. The eerily detailed account ended with a description of a man in a dark coat entering her house. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. Her own voice, a phantom echo in the musty basement, was a chilling testament to the terrifying reality she was now a part of. With a gasp, Emma realized the implication. She was no longer the passive recipient of these narratives. She was the subject, the victim. Her mind raced, adrenaline surging through her veins. The rooms of her house, once familiar, now seemed fraught with hidden threats. Summoning her courage, she ventured through her home, armed with her camera flash for protection. The house was eerily silent, save for the soft whir of the reel-to-reel tape recorder in the basement. As she descended the stairs, she felt a cold rush of air. Suddenly, the figure emerged from the shadows. The man in the dark coat. In the flesh, he was even more terrifying. His face obscured, his presence domineering. With a jolt of fear, she fired her camera flash, temporarily blinding the man. She seized the moment and fled upstairs, her heart pounding in her ears. As she bolted her bedroom door behind her, the full weight of her reality crashed down. The chilling narrations had come to life, and she was the next chapter. With her heart pounding against her ribcage, Emma fumbled with her phone, her fingers trembling as she dials 911. She relayed the urgent situation to the operator in hurried whispers, her eyes fixed on her bedroom door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. The operator assured her that help was on the way. From beyond her door, she could hear the slow, methodical footsteps of the man in the dark coat. He was ascending the stairs, each footfall echoing like a death knell in the quiet house. The noise stopped abruptly as distant sirens began to wail, cutting through the oppressive silence. Emma held her breath, straining her ears. She heard nothing, just the pounding of her own heartbeat. Then the sirens grew louder, closer until they filled the air around the house. Finally, the silence of the house was broken by the urgent knocks of the police. Emma, reassured by their presence, mustered the courage to unlock her door. The man in the dark coat was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had vanished, a ghost dissolving into the ether. Despite their thorough search, the police found no evidence of a break-in, no signs of the man in the dark coat. They took Emma's statement, her frantic account of the figure from the tapes. Though puzzled, They promised to keep an eye on her property and increase patrols in her area. As the police left, Emma was alone once more, left to grapple with the terrifying reality that had unfolded in her home. But as she attempted to find sleep in the quiet aftermath, a soft hum emanated from the basement. A familiar, chilling sound. With the hum reaching her ears, Emma felt a chill creep down her spine. It was a sound she had come to dread, the mechanical song of the reel-to-reel tape recorder. It was a sound that, in the past few weeks, had become synonymous with terror. The mere thought of another tape filled her with unspeakable fear, but she knew she couldn't ignore it. Drawing on every ounce of her courage, she descended the stairs to the basement. There it was, a new tape, its reel spinning gently. Hesitant, she pressed play, and a fresh wave of dread washed over her as her own voice filled the room again. Her voice was shaking, detailing the night's terrifying events. The appearance of the man in the dark coat, her desperate call to the police, their futile search, and the chilling loneliness afterwards. Her past few hours, in her own voice, recorded and replayed in haunting clarity. A terrifying realization gripped her. She was now a part of the nightmarish cycle of the basement tapes. It was not over. It had only just begun. Her life was being documented, her fear recorded, and her horror replayed in her own voice. The man in the dark coat wasn't just a figure in the shadows anymore. He was the living, breathing embodiment of her nightmares. Feeling the walls of the house close in on her, she ascended the stairs, each step heavier than the last. Back in the safety of her room, she glanced out of her window, her eyes searching the dark, quiet street. And there he was again, standing in the shadows, a man in a dark coat. The cycle had not been broken. It had claimed its next victim. Her. The quaint, peaceful house in the suburbs was no longer a haven. It was the stage for a spine-chilling horror story, where the protagonist was ensnared in a cycle of terror that could strike anyone, anywhere. And with that, dear listeners, we leave Emma, in her house on the outskirts of town, the newest victim in an unending nightmare, a testament to the real-life horrors that lurk just beneath the surface of ordinary life. May her story serve as a chilling reminder of the dark, unexplored corners of our world, where reality often proves to be more terrifying than the worst of our nightmares.